conservative-dominated Supreme Court appears ready to make it much easier for President Trump and Republicans to keep their grip on power in Washington in maintaining control of the House. So you, of course, have been following what's been going on with redistricting in Texas, the reaction to that in blue states like California. Well, today, the court is reconsidering a central pillar of the Voting Rights Act. That is, of course, the landmark civil rights era law that was aimed at protecting the vote of every American, regardless of skin color. The issue, Louisiana's new congressional map. A group of non-black voters say that the state racially discriminated when it created a second black majority district. In oral arguments today, the court's conservative majority seemed to indicate they're inclined to agree.
This court cases in a variety of contexts have said that race-based remedies are permissible for a period of time, sometimes for a long period of time, decades in some cases, but that they should not be indefinite and should have an endpoint. And what exactly do you think the endpoint should be, or how would we know for the intentional use of race to create districts?
So the court may soon effectively forbid states from considering race when they draw their congressional district maps. And that would allow Republican-controlled legislatures across the country to potentially eliminate majority-minority districts, many of which currently held by Democrats. This is, of course, just one piece of the battle in this nationwide war for control of the House. Republicans hold the chamber by an incredibly slim margin, just 5 seats. Every district matters.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy. So it appears as if the conservative Supreme Court is ready to take a sledgehammer to the precious Voting Rights Act, specifically Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which would essentially eliminate upwards of a dozen Democratic-held districts across the South. Okay, this is the doomsday scenario that liberals, Democrats, the media, they're worried about, because if the Supreme Court basically rules that you cannot have these minority districts, right? These minority drawn districts where, again, essentially Democrats want to draw district lines based off race, which is, again, textbook racism. Yeah, it seems as if that would eliminate an advantage that Democrats currently have when it comes to these congressional races, okay, in which you have these districts that are all black, that are drawn on racial lines, and all these black people vote Democrat, which, again, is now why Democrats are desperately arguing that, yeah, it's totally fine to have racist districts.
So what they understand, if we assault the 1964 Civil Rights Act and get rid of that, and then we completely get rid of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, what we have effectively done is gutted black leadership and African Americans from being able to take advantage of what happens in this country. So while a lot of y'all are bullshitting around on whether you can be on fucking TikTok, while you're getting caught up in some bullshit housewife, while you're having your fucking MJ and LeBron debates on who's the GOAT, there is literally, as we speak, an entire focus to gut every single civil right and economic gain that we have had since 1964, because they are pissed with those three acts. They're pissed with the Brown versus Board of Education Act. You have voucher bills that are being pushed in Texas and Tennessee and other places to gut public education. What we have to understand is there is a vicious assault to completely defund Black America.
Because apparently white Democrats, right, even white liberals, refuse to vote for black candidates. This is what was argued by the NAACP, right, one of their lawyers, during this Supreme Court hearing on this topic of the Voting Rights Act and potentially, again, eliminating Section 2.
That's right. And in the state of Louisiana, that analysis was conducted in the Nairn case. And it was clear that regardless of party, white Democrats were not voting for black candidates, whether they were Democrats or not. And we know that there is such a significant chasm between how black and white voters vote in Louisiana that there's no question that even if there is some correlation between race and party, that race is the driving factor.
Yeah. So what you have here is this NAACP lawyer admitting the quiet part out loud, which is that, you know, those white Democrats, right, they so racist that they would not vote for a black candidate, even if it's a Democrat. And that is the reason why you need race-based districting, because, again, Democrats are so racist that they won't vote for black people, right? Only black people will vote for black people. And therefore, this is why you need race-based gerrymandering, okay, which on its face, on the surface, is unconstitutional.
What role did Robinson play in the development of SB 8?
Justice Thomas, Robinson is the only reason SB 8 exists. We fought tooth and nail in the Robinson litigation itself in telling the courts that we did not think the Constitution permitted us to draw a second majority black district. As you know, under protest, we drew SB 8 because the threat was that the federal courts were going to do it if we didn't. And that's, I mean, I think that's the best way to conceive of why SB 8 exists. We would never pass SB 8 in the first instance without Robinson, Justice Thomas.
What were the findings in Robinson?
The finding by the Middle District in Robinson was that the plaintiffs in this case were likely to show a violation of Section 2, and the likely violation, and I'm using very broad terminology because I do not know what the underlying violation is. I can't articulate that for you, Justice Thomas, because I don't think anybody can. But I think the finding in the district court's mind in that case was that the likelihood of a Section 2 violation meant that a majority black district was required, a second one. And I think like that was the bottom line, and when our legislature saw that, we understood the marching order, and that's why you see SB 8 as it exists today.
Just briefly, what were the findings that led to that conclusion?
Well, Your Honor, running through the preconditions and the totality of the circumstances, I mean, I think the totality of the circumstances did most of the work for the Middle District in Robinson. Senate Factor 1, the official history of past discrimination, Justice Thomas, we can never outrun the bad era of poll taxes, of grandfather clauses, of literacy tests. I think we're always going to lose across the board on that kind of analysis, and that's what the Middle District in Robinson focused on, is how bad was Louisiana in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and, you know, add all that together, and at the end you have a vote dilution finding that I don't think is clearly articulable in the way that SFFA requires a finding of discrimination to be specified.
You could control for partisan effect. There was racially polarized voting even within the Democratic Party. That's where Section 2 matters, where you have a reason to think that a racial group is being treated.
Here too. You have proof of that here.
No, you don't. What you have here is that Republicans and Democrats are different. There's
no. You have some that even white Republicans or white Democrats won't vote for black candidates.
Right, but if these were white Democrats, there's no reason to think they would have a second district. None. And so what is happening here is their argument is because these Democrats happen to be black, they get a second district. If they were all white, we all agree they wouldn't get a second district. That is literally the definition of race subordinating traditional principles.
Yeah. So I just want everybody to understand exactly what's going on here, right? Just so that nobody's confused in regards to what Democrats are arguing for, right? What liberals are arguing for, because they're quite literally arguing for the government to engage in racism, right? Because in Louisiana, there was earlier litigation in which a district court found that Louisiana's 2022 congressional map likely violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Okay, basically saying, hey, listen, you have to have another black district, right? You have to draw your map in a way that encompasses more black people so that they have their proper representation, right? Again, basically, the Voting Rights Act required that the state literally draw racial lines, right? Racial lines. Now, again, as pointed out by the state in their argument, that they would not have done this, okay, had it not been for the findings of earlier litigation saying that the original map violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, aka they didn't really want to draw a district where you're basically racial gerrymandering, right? You're drawing districts based off race. They're only doing it because the courts are forcing them to do it based off the Voting Rights Act, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which basically requires racial considerations, racial remedies, okay, when it comes to districting, okay? And that in and of itself is unconstitutional because the Constitution is supposed to forbid the government from doing stuff like this, right? That's the issue, okay? So when Democrats talk about standing up for the Constitution, anybody that basically supports race-based gerrymandering is quite literally going against what the Constitution is supposed to be. Now, the only reason this was allowed to pass, right, is because of the fact that at the time period, it seemed necessary to essentially pass arguably unconstitutional legislation in order to remedy the race problem, right? The race issue, okay, that we had in this country. The question before the court is whether or not enough time has passed to where this is not needed anymore, because again, it is clearly unconstitutional for the government to be forced to do racial gerrymandering, right? Because we already know that if the roles were reversed, okay, if the state had drawn out a district based off white voters or white representation, everybody knows that would not fly. That would be blatantly unconstitutional. Okay. So again, the question is, are we at the point now where we can actually have equal rights? Okay. Or do we still have to live in a time period where certain groups of people based off their race need special rights? Okay. Again, even if it's not constitutional, this is the same question that came up about affirmative action, which is probably why, again, it is likely that the Supreme Court is going to take a sledgehammer to the Voting Rights Act. But it's the same question. It's like, has enough time passed where, you know, the government can get out of the business of discriminating against people based off their skin color and their race? Okay. I think enough time has passed. But again, according to the black liberals, right? Liberals, Democrats, no, enough time hasn't passed, right? You have to keep this in place for eternity, right? Into perpetuity, despite the fact that we're not living in Jim Crow anymore.
Is something like the ADA. Congress passed the Americans with Disabilities Act against the backdrop of a world that was generally not accessible to people with disabilities. And so it was discriminatory in effect because these folks were not able to access these buildings. And it didn't matter whether the person who built the building or the person who owned the building intended for them to be exclusionary. That's irrelevant. Congress said the facilities have to be made equally open to people with disabilities if readily possible. I guess I don't understand why that's not what's happening here. The idea in Section 2 is that we are responding to current day manifestations of past and present decisions that disadvantage minorities and make it so that they don't have equal access to the voting system, right? They're disabled. In fact, we use the word disable in Milligan. We say that's a way in which you see that these processes are not equally open.
Yeah. So I want you guys to understand the pretzel that Democrats are bending themselves into, right? As you just heard, Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is a sitting Supreme Court justice, okay? She's black. She's basically comparing black people to disabled people, right? She's saying, well, see, you don't understand, right? Black people are still disabled, right? Black people are like disabled folks. They need a handicap, right? They need a wheelchair to go vote, right? To have proper representation, black people need unfair treatment, preferable treatment from the government. It's been over 50 years. It's been over 50 years. If white Democrats don't want to support black folks, right, then hey, it is what it is. It is what it is. But again, that doesn't mean that, again, 50 years removed from the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, that doesn't mean that we still need this stuff, right? I mean, at some point, right, we progress to a society, again, where we have a majority of the country voted for a black man to be president, right? I think that black folks should be able to appeal to other people outside of black people, right? I think it's a problem. It would be a problem, okay, if you had a white politician overtly saying, hey, I want to appeal to white people, right? Or to white voters only. And let's draw maps in order to maximize white representation. That would never, ever, ever fly, right? It would never fly. So again, in this case, right, the reason why Democrats would lose so many seats is literally because of the fact that white Democrats won't vote for black candidates. And because of that, right, that makes it less likely that Democrats would be able to win in maps that are redrawn that's not based off race. And that is why the mainstream liberal media, they're freaking out over what happens if the Supreme Court does what a lot of people think that the Supreme Court is going to do. If they do take a sledgehammer to the Voting Rights Act, the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, then the South is going to be all red, right? It's going to be all red, okay? And that is what the mainstream liberal media is worried about. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Okay, so, if you go back 6 months ago, you go back to April, Kate Baldwin, what were we looking at? Well, we were looking at the Democrats with a very clear shot of taking control of the U.S. House of Representatives, according to the Kalshi prediction market odds. We saw them at an 83% chance. But those odds have gone plummeting down. Now we're talking about just a 63% chance, while the GOP's chances up like a rocket, up like gold, up from 17% to now a 37% chance. So we'll look like a pretty clear, likely Democratic win in the House come next year has become much closer to a toss-up at this point, although still slightly leaning Democratic.
What's changed? What are you seeing?
Okay, what has changed? Well, why don't we just take a look at the national picture first? Take a look at voters and how they're feeling about things. And we can take a look at the generic congressional ballot. And I want to take a look and compare it to 2017, 2018, right? Because that's sort of the baseline. That was, of course, the first Trump term. That was where Democrats were sort of keeping pace. You go back to April, look at the generic congressional ballot. What you see? You see +3 Democrats in 2025 in April. You see +3 Democrats back in April of 2017. Now jump over to this side of the screen. What happens? Well, the Democrats are no longer keeping pace with the pace that they were setting back in 2017, 2018. You look back in 2017, you saw that the Democrats had leaped up to an 8-point advantage. I remember covering this. I remember a lot of folks, including myself, saying, you know what, Republicans look pretty decent right now in terms of the fact that they had the House, they had the Senate, they had the presidency, but things were likely going to flip. And I was looking for the same signs this year. The bottom line is it hasn't happened, Kate Baldwin. It hasn't happened. Democrats have stayed basically steady. They have fallen off the pace. Democrats were way out ahead back in 2017 on the generic congressional ballot. And now we're basically looking at Democrats ahead. But again, they are so far in back of the pace that they set back there. And so I think what a lot of folks are seeing, folks like myself, are saying, wait a minute, given what we might be seeing in redistricting, is this +3 going to be enough, Kate Baldwin?
Well, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, I mean, Democrats haven't made any progress, right? They literally made no progress since Trump got in office. Again, usually the opposition, they make progress because people get pissed off about what the people in power are doing, right? But Democrats are so bad, right, that, again, they are getting nowhere, right? Absolutely nowhere with Trump derangement. Now, again, the lefties believe that Democrats aren't making any progress because they're not Trump deranged and far left enough. I am sticking with my position, which is that Democrats, because they continue to try to appeal to these far leftists, normal, sane people don't want to vote for Democrats, right? Normal, sane people are like, no, we know what the last 4 years under Joe Biden were. We don't want to live that anymore, right? And I think that is a stain. That is a stain on Democrats who continue to lean into the far left nonsense that, again, people are scarred by what we experienced over the past 4 years with Joe Biden. They don't understand that. They have to move to the middle.
One change from that cycle is also this mid-decade redistricting effort that we've been covering so much. You add that in, and what do you get?
Okay, so we add that, and we take a look at the national picture, but then we, of course, taking a look at the state legislators, right? They are potentially changing things, and there are two things that are going on here. First off, net mid-decade redistricting gains. If both sides max out at this point, there are more Republican gains possible than Democratic gains. Yes, the Democrats might try to counter a Texas and a California, but you go along in the different states and basically Democrats run out of room where Republicans are able to gain and gain and gain. If both sides max out, we're probably looking at a GOP gain of +7 House seats. That doesn't even take into account the potential gutting of the VRA that is right now going to be in front of the Supreme Court. If you add that in, you could be looking...
The Voting Rights Act.
What? Yes, exactly right. The Voting Rights Act. If you add that in, then you could be looking about adding 10, 12, 15, 17 on top of this 7 seats. So I think a lot of folks like myself are looking at this. We're seeing, hey, wait a minute. Those national polls are Democrats are not gaining the way that we expected. Then you add in the fact that the state legislators are adding potentially more GOP seats like they've already done down in Texas, like they've done in Missouri. And then you add in the potential gutting of the VRA. And all of a sudden, it becomes much more difficult for Democrats to gain, especially given that they are not keeping up with their 2017, 2018 pace.
And as you said, that also makes it difficult to compare it to past examples in history, because this is such a different new landscape that we're looking at.
It's a different new landscape, and we're not quite sure how much Democrats will have to be ahead in the National House vote in order to gain control.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, Democrats are cooked. That's doomsday. That's doomsday, guys. It's over. It's checkmate. Bruh. This midterms, right? The midterms coming up next year, it's probably going to be the most important midterms of my life. Okay? I'm so serious, because if Democrats gain back power and control, they are going to weaponize the government in a way that we've never seen before, especially if they win in the midterms and then they win in 2028. They get some radical lunatic in office. Bruh. It's going to be tough to be conservative in this country, right? So this is why we got to win. Right? We could never, ever let Democrats gain back power. I mean, not anytime in the near future. And this is why Republicans are smartly trying to max out their seats, right? And again, the Supreme Court, if they, again, take a sledgehammer to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, yeah, Democrats ain't coming back from this. And it's kind of crazy once you think about how skewed the system is against Republicans, right? You think about all this stuff, right? Considering the fact that the GOP, if they redistrict to the max, Democrats can't out-redistrict them because of the fact that they've already maxed out their gerrymandering, right? Democrats have already maxed out their gerrymandering. So Republicans haven't even maxed that out. And then on top of that, Democrats also are getting seats because of racist gerrymandering that is basically endorsed by the state, right? Which guarantees the Democrats at least one House seat, right, in a red state, because again, the states have to draw their lines to coddle the black voters, right? And make sure, hey, we got a majority black district, okay? Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where once you realize all of the advantages that Democrats have built into the system, you understand why they boohoo whine and cry so much about what's happening. They're not boohoo whine and crying based off any principle, right? Like, for example, being against racism, because if they're against racism, I don't understand how you can argue for racially drawn districts if you're against racism, right? But anyways, what they're actually really arguing for are policies that maximize their power and control. And again, it's not based off any real principle outside of, well, what's good for us, what's bad for Republicans. All right, this is good for us. Cool. We're cool with racism, right? As long as it benefits us. And that's what you're seeing here. And this is why they're in panic mode, because the Supreme Court and Republicans are about to level the playing field, and Democrats can't stand anything more than a level playing field. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.